Hello, my name is Eric Normand. I'm very happy today because I got to talk to Kim Foster of Cognitect. Cognitect, as you probably know, is the company that stewards the development of Clojure. They also run two or three, depending on how you count, conferences, Clojure conferences in America and Europe. And they have a podcast called the Cognicast, and they also do Clojure consulting, and they created Datomic. So, very exciting to be talking with Kim, who is part of their HR team. She does recruiting and other work there, among which is producing the podcast, which I think is pretty cool. I'm very happy to talk to Kim in particular because she is, besides being just a very nice person, she is very down to earth and she tells it like it is. So I wanted to get an idea from her about how she perceives the Clojure job market. As consultants, they're in touch with a lot of companies, and so they see what's going on out there. They do training, they help companies with their hiring, they will consult with companies when they need a little bit of extra manpower. So they really are right there inside the companies, understanding their needs and what kind of companies are out there. So I'm just gonna jump right in. Hi Kim, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Eric. How are you?
I'm very good. Thanks for talking with me and sharing this with everyone today. Um, so Kim, you work at Cognitect. Can you tell me what Cognitect does?
Yes, so we have a couple of business lines. We certainly have a product team that supports the development of Datomic
Hmm.
and supports our customers in using Datomic. And then we also have an active Clojure consultancy that focuses on building mostly distributed systems at this point, but certainly there are other issues that we tackle as well. And it's predominantly Clojure work.
Okay.
I think probably most of what we build is built in Clojure, but of course, as our clients are more and more sophisticated and larger in size, we certainly work with other languages in terms of interfaces and interoperability a lot.
Right, I see.
Mhm.
So you have a product which is Datomic, and so you're selling and supporting that, and you're also a consultancy working mostly in Clojure. Cool, cool. And what is your role in particular at
Um,
Cognitect?
so my main role is recruiting. That's
Hmm.
what I was hired to do.
Hmm.
But Cognitect is not a large company, so most of us, especially on the operations side of the house, wear several hats. And one of the business lines that I didn't mention is our conference uh,
Right.
business line. And so I'm very involved with that, working with Lynn Grogan, whom a lot of people know in the community, and Alex Miller. My role, along with doing some of the lifting on organization, is also kind of the business management side of things.
Okay.
I actually have a background. My first career was in accounting, so
All right.
so I use those skills again here at Cognitect to work on various projects.
Yeah, and you also do some work on the podcast, the Cognicast.
I'm the producer on the podcast,
Hmm.
and that means a lot of the organization of that
Uh-huh.
effort, it falls to me. Reaching out to guests and coordinating
Right.
things,
Uh-huh.
uh, writing the blog post.
Uh-huh.
So
And
I actually listen to every
you
single
listen to everyone. Okay,
every.
that's cool.
Mhm.
That's cool. Um, wow, you must learn a lot from that.
I do. In the beginning, I was a little nervous because some of our guests are. take a far more technical approach to the conversation than others, and I would say I lacked confidence in the beginning listening to those, but I'm more comfortable now and just try to take the perspective that, okay, if a topic sounds like something I would want to read more about, it's probably a topic that someone else wants to read more about as well.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And y'all have how many programmers work at Cognitect?
So we have about 30 total
Uh-huh.
employees. I would say probably 20, more than 20 of those are programmers.
Okay.
And even some of the ones who don't program on a daily basis, like Justin, our CEO, and Russ, our VP of Consulting Services, they are capable of being
Sure.
programmers, certainly are programmers at heart.
Sure.
So
Okay.
operationally, we have three kind of accounting, finance, HR people, and two or three people on the sales team, and everyone else is technical.
Okay. Wow. So it's some I guess it's mostly programmers and then some support for them.
Right,
I
right.
see. Okay. And as I understand it, it's mostly remote.
That's correct. We didn't set out to be a distributed company in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Stu and Justin are both from Durham, North Carolina. They love it here. They like to have a local company in their
Right.
hearts, I guess.
Uh-huh.
But it quickly became apparent that in order for us to work with the talented consultants that we wanted to work with, it wasn't going to be possible for us to convince them all to move to North Carolina with us. So
Right. The
that's what
barbecue's not that good. Is that
it's
what you're
not
saying?
unless you're from here. And even if you're from here, you have to argue about which region of the state is
That's true.
best.
That's true.
Um, so we made the decision then to be a distributed company.
Uh-huh.
So we probably have 10 people who could commute to the office in Durham.
Okay.
We're not necessarily required to commute because most people don't come to the office. We certainly are. It, it,
Too
it's do
far. There.
Yeah, it's doable and easy for us to work from home as
Okay.
well.
That's
We
cool.
have that option,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Uh,
think uh, everyone makes their own choice. There are all kinds of reasons that commuting may not be the best choice. Or
right.
personally, I like to be around people, and I like to leave my house and go to an office every day. So
Right.
I'm here most days.
Well, I've worked remote for so long now. I don't know how I would go to the office because my life has become so, I'll throw in a load of laundry, I'll wait for the
Mhm.
plumber. Like
Right.
I don't know how you do that if you have to go to the office. Do you take
So
a sick day or
even though I come to the office most of the time, I totally agree. If I had to go back to a company where people took attendance
yeah,
and didn't trust that I was doing my job, even if I weren't sitting behind a desk,
right,
I think that would be really difficult for me.
right. Okay, well, let's get back to Clojure and working at Cognitect. Um, so one question that people ask me all the time, and I don't know if I don't have an answer because it's different for every company, but at Cognitect, how much Clojure do you need to know to be a programmer at working at Cognitect?
So I think we're in a not a unique situation because there are plenty of consultancies out there.
Hmm.
But in a consultancy, what you're selling is expertise.
Right.
So I would say that most of our developers are fairly senior,
Hmm.
both in terms of their breadth of experience with Clojure and other languages and different software development methodologies and architecture exposure, all of those things.
Right.
And I think that they're fairly deep with their Clojure skills.
Hmm.
I will say that given the fact that we see our projects becoming broader and broader as we work with more enterprise companies, we definitely are placing more value on the experience you have alongside your Clojure experience.
Okay. Meaning like a variety of work experience besides
A
Clojure?
variety of languages, those are all important to us
Right,
in the current marketplace.
right. I see, I see. So, just a little bit more about working at Cognitect.
Okay.
Um, what is the hiring process like?
Mm-hmm.
If someone wanted to, try to get a job at Cognitect, what do they need to do?
So the first step is either to email jobs at Cognitect or me, Kim at Cognitect.
Uh-huh.
Everything lands on my desk eventually. So,
Okay, yeah.
and typically, the initial conversation will be with me, and
Okay.
we'll have some high level conversation about experience level and interest and domain exposure and kind of more general interview questions like, are you willing to travel, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I will
Mm-hmm.
say that we try to keep travel as low as possible.
Okay.
It's not 0% travel here.
And the travel would be to a client site or to the mothership, to the home office?
So some of both.
Uh-huh.
We try to launch a client project from the client site, if at
Okay.
all possible. I think
Okay.
we feel that that gets the project off to a better start and helps us build relationships that
Right.
facilitate working remotely in the
That
future.
makes a lot of sense. Put a name to a face before if you're going to be talking with them a lot.
Right. And then we also try to bring employees to the mothership on a fairly regular basis just to make sure that our team stays connected.
Right. Okay.
Um, Projects, I would say the worst project I've ever seen might have been 25% travel.
Wow. So 25% of the time they were not at their home.
Right. But that is not typical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And for people who are used to consultancies like ThoughtWorks, or like I said, I come from an accounting background, so I work for KPMG.
Mm.
Work for those kinds of consultancies. Travel is probably 50 to 100%.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in the grand scheme of the business world, I feel like Cognitect is really does a lot to maintain people's work-life balance.
Okay. Cool.
And I think it's the rare project that might be 25%. That is not normal for us.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I see. So most of the time it's well less than that. So
Right.
cool.
Uh,
Cool.
but it does happen.
So they talk to you, and then there's an interview process.
There is an interview process, and that would, once I talk to people and evaluate them, if both I and the candidate feel like it makes sense, then we'll move forward to a more technical process.
Okay.
A theoretical conversation, I like to say that's more talking about how you would solve a particular problem
I see.
than actually touching the keyboard and solving it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
From there, if that goes well, people will have remote pairing sessions so we can get into the nitty gritty of what their development skills are and what Cognitect's development style is. It's really a good exposure for everyone involved
Yeah.
in terms of determining whether or not it's a good fit.
So you'll pair for a couple of hours just to understand.
Right. Each pairing session is around a couple hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also a more traditional interview with a project coach and with our VP of Consulting Services.
I see, with like a folder with a resume and go over.
Not that traditional. A
All
Google
right.
Doc.
A Google Doc. Okay, I see. I see. Cool.
Typically, oftentimes those interviews are also remote video
Mm-hmm.
interviews.
Okay.
It just depends on where everybody's situated and where they plan to work, and a lot of factors.
Right. Right. That makes sense. I mean, if you're gonna work remote, might as well hire remote too. So cool. Well, I might have a question later on about working at Cognitect, but really the other reason I wanted to talk to you, Kim, is that because you're a consultancy, you interface with a lot of companies. You get a lot of information about what's out there, um, companies of all different sizes and project types. And so, really, people are very, oh, they wonder, they're curious about the job market and what it's like. So, I guess I'll start with the a big one is the number of companies using Clojure growing?
So, from my perspective, this is anecdotal,
Okay,
but I
yeah.
have to say that it is.
Uh-huh.
And I base that upon what I see on the Clojure community website as we continue to expand the list of companies who are using Clojure.
Right.
That grows all the time.
Right. I'll link to that in the notes. There's
Right.
a page that lists like I don't know hundreds of companies that are
Right.
using Clojure.
Exactly. And I also base it on the fact that through my work with the conferences, every year we have new sponsors that none of us have heard of who are using Clojure.
Yeah.
It's also a complete indication that definitely new companies are adopting all the time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And do you, I mean, this is kind of, I hope it's an easy question to answer, but does that mean the number of jobs is increasing?
Yes, and definitely. And in my role, while I'm not a billable consultant, I do act in a consulting capacity for our clients when they're stuck
Uh-huh.
on hiring efforts.
Okay.
Before I came to Cognitect, I was a third-party recruiter for many, many years.
Okay.
So I kind of step into that role, not in terms of actually doing recruiting work for our clients, but in terms of counseling them on how to go about it.
Oh, I see. Oh, good. So you'll have some good advice.
You know, we see startups that are hiring from the ground up and putting the teams together. We see established companies who are looking either for more Clojure developers or for more senior Clojure developers, and a lot of times for training as well.
Okay.
For the teams they have in place.
Okay. Um, Before we go on, are you brushing against the microphone? It sounds like every now and then something is brushing.
Okay. I am not touching anything
Not
now.
touching anything? Okay. Um, yeah. Then I don't know what it could be. Right.
Sometimes I feel like this recording could be doomed, but
Could be. Right. So the number of jobs is increasing. There's companies of all like startups all the way to like enterprise companies. Um, you mentioned that sometimes you'll help a company when they get stuck hiring. Would
right.
you say that it's uh, you know a hiring market or a hirer's market or an employee's market?
Hmm.
Like, do I get my choice as an employee, like where to work, or who gets the choice, the better choice?
So I don't think it's traditional in that sense.
Okay.
I think the issue right now is geography and connection.
Uh-huh.
So I think there are employers and I think there are employees, and I think they're having a really hard time finding one another.
Right.
So it's exciting to me to see Clojure specific job boards popping up.
Uh-huh.
It's exciting to me to see the activity in the Clojure meetup world, because those are networking outlets
Sure.
that employers and candidates can use to find one another.
Right.
And I think it's more about, it's also that distributed versus co-located decision. That's a hard decision for companies to make.
Yeah.
So sometimes it has to do with being able to find the people sitting where you want them to be.
Right. So, if I'm interpreting this correctly, sometimes these companies are out in somewhere, some city, let's say, that they just aren't finding what they're looking for in the city.
Right. That's correct.
And so you recommend that they maybe loosen up their idea about where they would hire from and just hire remote.
Well, I certainly encourage them to contemplate that seriously.
Uh-huh.
It isn't easy to be a distributed company, and if that's not going to be successful,
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure what the answer is there. But
Yeah.
I don't think a company should jump into being distributed without really thinking it through
Okay.
and putting the communication tools required in place.
Right.
But I do always recommend that they contemplate that.
Okay. Okay. There's a company here that opened an office, and it started with just the CTO, and they started hiring juniors, people who had maybe done an internship somewhere,
Right.
and got them up and running with Clojure like right away.
Hmm.
Do you see that happening?
I do see it happening some, and I think uh, through our consultancy, we certainly have been called in to help train that type of team.
Okay. Okay.
Either, we can either provide classroom training or like side by side, kind of one to one or lunch and learn with the team, those types of things for companies who are really taking that path, saying we're committed to Clojure and we're committed to being local, and
Right.
here's the option. And I
Right.
think based on what I see in the candidate pool, the number of people that aren't really I certainly see both the willingness and the potential for that to be very successful.
Cool. Cool. And do you see people or companies like mm, having trouble with the training? Meaning, there's no real solution out there. They just have to give up on Clojure because it's not working.
So I can't say that I see that option readily.
Uh huh.
We're in a position that we interact with people when they are committed.
Right.
There may be companies who,
It's
I
failed.
suspect there are companies in every language
Yeah. Yeah.
who can't solve their own internal problems.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily hear about them and get to know them.
Right. For sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, everything I've heard, talking to people at companies, some companies are just really successful, even just pairing. Pairing, not no external training, just like here's a book, we're gonna pair a couple hours every day for a few months, and they just pick it up. Um, Seems like a good language to learn from. Um, so I know you said that the jobs are kind of all, from all the stripes. Um, are there any characteristics that you see happening in the Clojure jobs? Any particular things that stand out?
Um, I'm not sure I understand the question you're asking.
Yeah. Are there more jobs for like web programmers or distributed systems or tough concurrency problems, anything like that? I mean,
I think they're spread all over the boards.
mhm.
Depends. It just depends on the domain and the problem an organization is trying to solve.
Right,
Which
right.
things are uh, which things are a priority in that organization.
I I did another interview where I talked to a recruiter, and he said that they recommend to companies to not look as much at experience in a particular language as much as a an understanding of the fundamentals and the principles that just won't ever change.
Hmm.
Is that something you recommend? Is that something you see people doing? Saying like, oh, well, this person might not know Clojure, but they've been on the JVM for a while, and they're obviously really smart, so let's just hire them.
They might have some functional language background,
Yeah, right.
isn't Clojure. They might have architectural experience that's relevant.
Yeah.
My personal philosophy of recruiting, no matter what the job description is that hiring for attributes is attributes can't be taught
Mm,
most of the time. Skills can be taught.
I see.
So if someone has some pretty serious indication that they can learn quickly
Uh huh.
and are interested and enthusiastic about learning what you need them to, then that's certainly something worth considering.
Right.
It depends a little bit on your organization's environment and what your timelines are as
Hmm.
well. I mean, if you have to have something finite accomplished in a specific deadline, you need to
Right.
factor all that in.
There's no time to learn something new.
Right.
You want them to get up and running. Yeah, that makes
And,
sense.
and we, along with employees, we also work with contractors, and that's one of the things that we look at in a contractor. The thing about being an independent contractor is you have to contribute right away
Uh huh.
uh,
Right.
to make it viable from a business perspective
Right,
for
because
it.
it's short term. It's not.
Right. So, in the case of a contractor, you don't really have the time to invest in
Right.
kind of onboarding and training.
Right.
Right.
Where would you recommend people look for jobs?
Um, well, as I alluded to earlier, there are a couple of Clojure only job boards. There's the Brave Clojure job site,
Mm-hmm.
and clojuredocs.org also has a job page now.
Uh huh.
Excuse me. Um, I think things like Stack Overflow and I can't believe I'm going to say Hacker News, but they job page.
Yeah, yeah. Companies do post stuff on there.
Right. You have to when you're looking for a job. Sometimes you really have to cast the net wide.
Yeah, yeah.
I think, as in most industries, personal networking is
Mm,
good.
for
So
sure.
attending conferences, talking to vendors there in the exhibitors halls, and job fairs. Some of the larger conferences have job fairs.
Uh
All of
huh.
those things are good ways to find a job. Attend your local meetup and chatting with people there. I imagine I don't follow the Clojure Slack channel all the time, but I imagine there are job postings there, or at least
Yeah,
mention of things there.
yeah.
Being active in all those community things
Right,
is
right.
very helpful.
So many jobs might not even make it to a listing
Correct.
because they talk to someone they know and then the deal is done
Right.
before it even gets there.
So
Um,
being active in the community is really critical.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I've gotten two of my past jobs just from being active here in the city,
Hmm.
and people started to get to know me and think of me when they had something. So I mean, I can't recommend it more. Just go to meetups; they're free, and you get to talk about Clojure, and yeah,
And
um,
that's the thing that professionals really need to do for themselves all the time.
it's true.
Because when you really, really need a job, if you don't already have that network built, it's
Right,
hard to do it in a short term.
right, right. It's um, it's probably hard because there's people who are, let's say they're working in a language like Java, something that's very stable. There's a lot of jobs, a lot of employees, and they've had the job for a while, and now they want to change. They want something like closure. Um, Going to a meetup sounds to me like, it's very little work to do, right? But it is a commitment to that particular language, right?
Right.
It is, maybe it's 2 hours once a month, but
Mhm.
you're actually saying, yeah, closure is the thing I want to pursue. And I can understand the hesitation, but I don't know, just go. Just check it out.
So I've actually had some personal experience with a family member who
Oh,
is job seeking right now,
okay.
and who had been in a really stable role and really did have to start from scratch on the networking.
Uh-huh.
And an approach that I recommended, and I think is a sound one, at least to try, is to pick several topic areas for meetups and spend a couple of months just attending everything.
Yeah.
That way you can settle down on what is really interesting to you
Right.
and pick one or two meetups to commit to
Right. Right.
so that it is effective. But once again, that's something that takes time. So waiting until
Sure.
you are actively job seeking is not practical.
Another thing that people ask me like, what is the minimum amount of closure I need, or what's a good amount of closure I need to be hireable?
Hmm.
And to me, that's like a trick question because, like I said, I know interns who knew no closure, who were just ready to learn, and they were hired to do closure, and they learned on the job. Um, and that's not always evident from the job listing,
Hmm.
right? And I don't know. There's I just feel like people don't apply to enough jobs. They they like their number one problem is not like their lack of skill. It's just not applying enough.
Hmm. That's an interesting point. And I find, especially in the closure world, that number of years of experience has no meaning.
Huh. Okay.
To me, it's about what you've built. And so if you've been
Uh,
involved in a really substantial, meaty project solving some really hard problem,
right.
you might have learned in 18 months what it took somebody else to learn 5 to 10 years to learn.
Right.
If they were, you know, doing something less complex and
Right.
less focused.
Right. Or if you were working at a big company and you were just like working on one little piece of this big thing, you didn't understand how it all worked.
Right. I also think open source
Hmm.
impacts whether or not years of experience is valuable.
Okay.
As there are plenty of people that I talk to that I feel definitely need to go through a technical interview, and the only closure they might have done was on an open source project.
Uh huh. Right.
And depending on what that project was and who you might have been working with,
Yeah.
that can be really valuable experience. And
Hmm.
um, more traditional HR people have a hard time knowing how to approach that because they're
Right.
looking for a way to quantify experience.
Right. Right. Yeah. The same interview that I mentioned before, he said something that was I thought was really insightful. That at some point, someone has to sit there and write the requirements for the job,
Right,
and it might not be the person who's hiring. They might not be technical, and they just need to write something. And it
right,
doesn't mean that that's the exact thing they're looking for.
right,
It's that is just what they had, what they thought of to write. So if it says 3 years of closure experience, you could you have to be creative and like make up 3 years of closure experience, right? You can say, well, I've got 5 years of Java experience, and I did closure projects like open source projects on the side for a year. Like that could equal a 3 years in closure.
Right. If you have senior level Java experience and really know your way around the JVM
Mm-hmm.
and have done a significant open source project,
Yeah.
definitely you're not an entry level Clojure programmer at that point
Right. Right.
because
Right.
you're not an entry level programmer, period. So yeah, and not all companies, not all frontline evaluate resume readers are able to evaluate that. So the more you can help them see in your resume,
Yeah.
the better off you will be.
Right.
And the bottom line is a job description, even the best written job description, is the wish list.
Yeah.
They're all describing unicorns
Right.
at the end of the day. So
Right.
if you have a significant amount of the experience they're asking for, craft your resume so that they can see what you do have
Uh-huh.
and give it a shot.
Yeah. Send it in. Just
Right,
apply.
right.
Um,
And if you can find someone inside the company in
mhm.
your network that can say, I know this person, they seem pretty sharp and eager to learn and, you know, have the qualities we're looking for, then all the better.
Right. Right. For sure. Yeah, and they might. I mean, someone from that company might go to a meetup.
Right,
So that's another reason to get out there.
right.
Um, I've you mentioned the Slack, the Clojure Slack. I have heard of people getting jobs like in the Slack.
I I don't doubt it.
So there is a jobs channel where people post
Hmm.
jobs, and there's also a jobs advice channel where
Yeah.
people like help you with your resume and stuff like that. So check that out.
Okay, I will.
Yeah. Um, wow, I don't know if I have anything more to talk about, Kim. Do you have anything more you'd like to say?
Uh, let's see. I think we've covered a lot of things, and I hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, I mean, my main reason for doing these has been to get. Okay, so here's what happened. You mentioned conferences before.
Right.
All the Clojure conferences I've been to, Alex Miller will get up on stage, and he will say, "Who's hiring?" And people raise their hands, and then he'll say, "Okay, now who wants a job?" And people raise their hands. And it's like, why aren't they, you know,
Exactly.
why aren't they finding each other?
Exactly.
And I think that there's a perception on both sides. Both groups feel like
Hmm.
um, the other group doesn't exist. And I've wanted to kind of connect them, at least give them, the idea that yes, there are jobs and yes, there are people to hire.
Hmm.
Um, you might have to look in a different place, but it's out there. So I hope that this conversation, I mean, everything that you said to me sounds like it has. It just confirms that as an employer, there are ways to hire Clojure programmers. It isn't like a risky move to make at this point.
Right.
Um, and also from the other side, that you can get a job in Clojure.
Um, yeah, I think that's the truth. All job hunts can be difficult, but
Mm-hmm.
persistence pays off.
Yeah, yeah.
And if listeners have specific questions for me, I'm happy to talk with people. You can find me at Kim at Cognitect. So,
Cool. Thanks, Kim. That would be really helpful. All right. Well, thanks for the conversation. This has been really great, really informative, and have a good one.
all right, you too.